Well, hello, you patient people. Thank you for waiting for us. It seems we had some streaming problems here at Studio Nasir, but our special guest, Ben Baer, has been patient and is still with us. Thank you for joining us on this fine Sunday, July 27th, 2025. Oh, am I getting...
Happy to be here.
Oops. Hold on. Let me... Sorry, I've got some duplicate going here. There we go. Wow, this stuff is complicated. Sorry about that, Ben. And folks, you good people listening, we have you up in the chat. And we are today talking to Ben Baer. This is a special episode, starting a little bit late, but we'll make up for that. Ben Baer joins us following an outstanding talk at OCON 2025 in Boston. Ben, how are you doing on this fine evening?
Doing great. Thanks for inviting me. Live television, everybody.
This is what you get. Yeah, I appreciate your patience on that. I'm going to leave out some of the usual opening talk that we would do, for example, pointing out that today is the 208th day of this your best year yet, etc., etc. We will leave that there because I really want to jump right to the topic at hand.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Ben Baer is a fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute, and he is our favorite friend, formerly from New Orleans, now in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, Amy's love for New Orleans, we've talked about that many, many times on the show. Someday we're going to move Studio Nasir from Motown to New Orleans. That is going to happen, I'm sure.
We're having OCON there next summer, so
yes,
that's
actually,
maybe an opportunity.
We will see you there at OCON next summer. That's the last week of June. So come to OCON in New Orleans next year. It's going to be a blast, and I'm so looking forward to it.
Yeah,
it'll be a little warm, though. Be forewarned.
You know, we went there last time in August of last year just to see if we couldn't survive the heat, and we did great.
We did. We had fans with built-in water mystery, all the things
we had
that
all
you
the
would
technology that actually worked.
Of course, you get a hotel that has a swimming pool. That's an important part of it, too. No, we are looking forward to next year's OCON, and we've told the story before that we thought, well, maybe OCON's not in the budget every year. Maybe we'll take next year off, and then they announce it's in New Orleans, and we're like, oh, I guess we are going. But speaking of OCON, the OCON 2025 talk you just gave, America's second, now I lost my title sheet here. But yes, America needs a second American Revolution, a declaration of independence from altruism. Altruism?
Altruism.
Isn't that just being nice to each other? Well, at an objectivist conference, everybody knows, but we have a mixed audience. Not everybody here would understand what you mean by that. So maybe we should start with the title. Do we need a declaration of independence from altruism?
Yes. And
yes.
Short answer.
Especially because it's not just, or not even being nice to one another.
Right.
Altruism's not the same thing as benevolence. It's the idea that you should sacrifice yourself for others. And it's worth pointing out that altruism is just the latest particular hot version of the call for self-sacrifice. Mm-hmm. It's there are often many other objects of sacrifice apart from other people. Could be that you're called to sacrifice for the sake of God or for the environment, and the common denominator of all of these is there's something evil about the self. There's something immoral or amoral about self-interest, life, happiness, and the objects of sacrifice, the other for which the sacrifice is intended, are, at least in my view, usually just rationalizations for an excuse to do that sacrifice.
Now it's interesting because in your talk you pointed out the left are sort of known for this. They're known for demanding sacrifices. They want you to give more. They want you to be taxed more. They want the people at the top of this enormous wealth inequality we have to be brought down to size. But you pointed out, no, it's not just the left that has altruism as their moral base. And you gave some great examples of this in your talk.
It's certainly not just the left. I think arguably the left is the the one that's the most explicit and consistent about it, at least in recent years in politics. But certainly it's not only them even now. And yeah, we talked, the talk focused mostly on the COVID pandemic and the different political reactions to it, both on the left and on the right. And I mean, I could say the same thing about any number of other case studies, but we talked about COVID because there it was notable that while it's perhaps the case that people associate the COVID lockdowns with Democratic governors like Gavin Newsom, California, Andrew Cuomo in New York, they're far from the only ones who did it. There were something like 19 states that were governed by Republicans that still had COVID pandemics. Had COVID pandemic lockdowns.
Yes.
Of one degree of severity or another. You actually measure them, and Oxford University did a study of how severe the different lockdown policies were in the different states. And the Republican ones were nearly as strict. They weren't quite as strict as the Democratic ones, but and they didn't start quite as early as the Democratic ones, but they came on the heels. They were basically shamed into doing the same thing, shamed on the basis of the same kind of altruistic justifications that the Democrats were giving, that we need to all be in this together, that we need to engage in shared sacrifice for the sake of the sick and the old, and that it was selfish to care, to want to go out and to try to live your life, even if you were willing to take meaningful precautions in the course of doing so. So. Yeah, and they even appealed to their earlier version of the morality of self-sacrifice, which of course is Christianity. I gave this example in the talk of how the governor of Alabama had a preacher come up on stage with her when she did her press conference announcing the lockdown, saying that God wants you to stay at home and give up going out for Lent. So it's the same. It comes to the same thing.
Yes, I remember that preacher, that quote. He said, "We have love that surpasses all understanding, and the Lord orders you to stay home." And that was really revealing to say that we have some kind of way to get at knowledge other than reason. It's beyond understanding. It surpasses all understanding.
Well,
it's some sort of feeling that you...
She's absolutely right. It was beyond understanding.
Some kind of divine revelation, that comes with love. So, yeah, that was pretty wild when you mentioned
for anybody out there who has not yet seen that outstanding OCON talk, America Should Declare Independence from Altruism, that will be the next thing that you watch after this show.
Yes.
Because you had... so many stories and evidence, and some things that we'd kind of forgotten. Pointing out, for example, that Ron DeSantis, he locked everybody down too. Everybody thought, well, because he let up some of the controls a little earlier, he was such a hero for free. No, not at all. And you showed this all in graphs. They're all in the talk. And you're right, they're parallel lines or parallel curves, and there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the left and the right.
Yes, and I love how you mentioned something I didn't know, that in 2019, WHO or WHO and John Hopkins actually came out with studies that challenged how during respiratory pandemics that you shouldn't be locking people down. That's not going to work. It's not going to be good for anybody. So why did they panic? Why couldn't they think logically or rationally at that time and say, look at these studies, maybe we shouldn't be locking everybody down for months?
Because I cited those studies because it helps illustrate that. The easy kind of rhetorical point to make is, which shows they weren't really following their own science. But the deeper point is that even though they had this science that was the result of many years of study saying this isn't going to work, they were willing to abandon it because they were, as you put it, they were panicking, and it was a moral panic. It wasn't that they were necessarily afraid that they themselves were going to get sick or everybody around them was going to get sick and die. I mean, there was and I emphasize, there is a real medical problem with COVID, it's a real serious threat, but is that the way to deal with it? And they were being shamed morally. It's like, if you don't do this, you just want people to die, or you want sick and old people to die. And so if you're not seen as doing something, even if it's discarding the previous research. I mean, it's a sign that it's a kind of psychological default on both the left and the right, that what you do when the chips are down, when there's an emergency, is a sign of what's your basic operating system, morally speaking. And so that kind of emergency brings out the fact that even on the right, which portrays itself as the party of freedom and Americanism and the pursuit of happiness, that's really just window dressing. And at the end of the day, they default to their usual Judeo-Christian morality, which is morality of self-sacrifice.
Yes. Yeah, you mentioned that, if you don't mind me doing another question.
Please.
You mentioned that Republicans, so you were talking about in the talk, the Republicans were evading altruism's requirements. So I'd like to get a little bit more deeper on altruism and what are the requirements of altruism? How does one practice altruism? And does it make any sense to do that in life? And what does altruism what does it actually look like? And how did the Republicans during COVID evade the fact that they were using it, and so on?
Well, so this is part of the reason why it's good that you asked the first question that you did about what really is altruism and why, is it the same thing as being nice to people and so forth? And it's important that it's not, because if that's all you thought that it was, then you might think, oh, all I need to do to be moral according to this doctrine is to, take care of my family and my friends and otherwise, live a ordinary American life, pursuing the American dream. And but of course, that's not really what it's about. It's about giving up, not about necessarily helping people. Of course, helping certain people, the people that you love, it can be very much part of your self-interest and part of your pursuit of happiness. Other people add enormous amounts of value to our lives. And so this came up in one particular example I give in the talk, and I think there's many other examples like it outside of COVID. But I gave the example of Shelley Luther, who was one of the lockdown protesters in 2020 in Texas. And she basically said, I don't want to have to shut down my business. I'm going to reopen in spite of the Republican Governor Abbott's executive order. And I'm going to make people wear masks, and we're going to do social distancing to the extent that we can. We're going to be as careful as we can, but I need to make a living. And so I'm going to reopen. And she got, of course, she got taken to court, and the judge called her selfish for doing it. Yeah. And I thought it was revealing the way she responded to that by saying, no, it's not selfish what I'm doing because I need to feed my kids. And my point, of course, is, well, but wanting to feed your kids, if you actually love them, is selfish. And so to me, it's an example of wanting to evade, as you put it, the requirements of altruism, wanting to be able to say that you're living up to this moral code because you're thinking of it or portraying it as just helping people. Here it happens to be the people that you love.
Yes.
You, at the same time, you don't want to actually do the real sacrificing that altruism actually calls for. Because what altruism calls for all the time is not only that you should give up your money and give up your time, but that you should sacrifice the well-being of your own loved ones. If somebody else's loved ones need something more. And in this case, it's the idea as well, there might be some sick and old people out here who you might transmit the disease to, even though, of course, they are free to protect themselves and other people are free to help protect them. But who knows what could happen is basically what they're saying.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that case got as much publicity as it did. I would love to have seen a little more nationwide publicity on Quentin Linda Cordair.
Yes.
Who would have been the last people to say, "Oh, yeah, we were sacrificing in our own way." No, that would not have happened. So
I know when she said, "Oh, it's
feeding my kids is not selfish.
Kids is selfish. It's extremely selfish.
Well,
why did you bring them in the world so that you could pester them with guilt? I mean, what on earth?"
It was absurd, but it's a good point that you make, and it's not obvious.
It isn't
to anybody except anybody who really thinks about it.
Yeah.
Because we have this vague sense of there is the narcissistic personality or the the malicious personality, and then we associate self-interest with that.
There's a lot of other examples, I think, where the same kind of thing comes up, and it's I think what's behind the broader approach that, broadly speaking, the right has had toward freedom and capitalism more generally. That they, on the one hand, want to be able to say that they are living up to their professed moral code, that they are against selfishness, that they're in favor of selflessness of some kind. But they also don't want to do the sacrificing of economic freedom, of wealth, et cetera, that altruism really demands. And so they'll often try to justify free markets and capitalism by saying, well, it's actually the system of helping out the poor, because it's the one that increases the general level of welfare. It's the one that creates prosperity, rising tide lifts all ships, et cetera. So they want to be able to argue, oh, actually, our system is the system of selflessness, because it helps people. But that's, of course, then again equivocating over what it means to be altruistic. Sometimes it means sacrificing for the sake of others, right. But that is not the same thing as any old way in which somebody is helped. Like, yes, capitalism actually does create enormous surplus, which can help those who really do want to help themselves. Turns out it doesn't actually help those who don't. Nothing can, but
right.
It's the same overall issue.
What I find really heinous is how altruists, they try to take values that are based in reason, that are actually based in in rational virtues, I should say. They try to take those values out of relationships as such, and they say, well, if you have loved ones, you love them altruistically. You love them just because it's your duty, or you love them because God tells you, or you love them because you feel like it. And you can't really go any further in defining that love. You just love them because that is your calling or whatever it is. And it completely takes out any explanation of why you value somebody.
Well, yeah, it disconnects values from reality.
Yeah.
And that gets me to kind of a wider question, which would be, and you touched on this in the talk and in the Q&A, does anybody debate ethics anymore, philosophical ideas anymore? I heard Will MacAskill in an interview, and I talked about this on an earlier show, and he was asked, Will MacAskill, famously of the effective altruism movement, and he was asked, well, what if I don't want to be an altruist, if I just don't hold that code? And MacAskill was not condemnatory. He was dismissive. He said, well, that's okay. You can do that, but that just means you're discarding the whole field of ethics. And talk about a frozen abstraction. To him, it's altruism or there is no field. There is no study. And what I wonder from you, because of your academic background, but also in terms of think tanks and is anybody out there talking about this besides the Ayn Rand Institute, besides the objectivists, or is it just altruism or nothing?
It's mostly us. It's mostly objectivists. I think the point that you're thinking of from the talk was a point about politics and how there's no serious debate between left and right about the big questions of political philosophy.
Right.
Which is also true, and it's related to this point because obviously the big questions of political philosophy are dependent on the big questions of moral philosophy. And so everybody, left and right, now seems to be in agreement that some form of statism is the right approach, which shouldn't come as a surprise, given that there's also no debate about individualism, egoism versus altruism. Everyone is on the default approach that some kind of altruism is right. And it's certainly the case that that's the dominant view in academia, in the wider culture, and almost nobody wants to raise these kinds of questions. There's like here and there if you poke around obscure corners of academia, you'll see people maybe influenced by Nietzsche or maybe influenced by Aristotle who will raise certain kind of very meek questions about about the dominance of altruism, and some of them are probably doing the best they can given what they know, but it's pretty pathetic as far as I'm concerned. And so this is certainly my mission, is to try to raise these questions and to challenge people about it, and writing more and more about it. And anybody knows anyone important who wants to debate it with me about it, I'd love to do it.
Yeah, I would love to make some impact on the contemporary popular intellectuals, Sam Harris and Steven Pinker and people, who are on the podcast circuit. And I don't know how you make any impact on people who, for example, champion determinism. How do you?
Well, it's not just that. I mean, I think generally, this actually came up at one point, and you probably remember at the conference. Yaron was commenting on it, I think, and maybe somebody asked him a question at the end about why can't we just find a famous person and get them to endorse Ayn Rand, and then we'll get a media marketing campaign around that. And I mean, that'd be great if any of them wanted to do it, but the experience of many decades is that they rarely do, if any. And there's probably reasons for that. I mean, you don't get to be famous in the first place without, doing very relatively popular things. And there's nothing more unpopular than selfishness. And so if you value that fame, you're probably not going to want to throw it away that quickly, even if you're iconoclastic on certain kinds of delimited issues. Very few people have the courage to be an iconoclast about all the sacred cows of a culture. And Sam Harris is a good example of that. I think I've heard several people who commented on how they've, through one fan forum or another, have tried to convince him to read Atlas Shrugged or something like that, and maybe he even did and said he didn't like it at all, and it's not what he stands for. And if you look at his own thinking about ethics, it's very conventional. I mean, he's trying to find a kind of secular rational basis for ethics, but he's doing it by trying to figure out, well, how can I find a way to secularize the Judeo-Christian requirements?
Yes.
Which is not too special.
Okay, can I just do a little jazz riff here and just kind of give you what I think? This is how I would explain to my friends what altruism is and why there are better moral ideas out there and why you should come to me and ask me about them. So altruism is basically born out of obedience to other people in your thinking. It's obeying your parents, or obeying society or your tradition or your culture. It's obeying what your religion tells you, what God says, or God's representatives. Or it can also be in a subjectivist form where you're just kind of flowing on your whims, stream of consciously, and doing what you feel.
Well, even that comes from others.
Yeah.
Altruism is literally otherism.
Right. And the way that I would describe it is that altruism ultimately is a call to obey what's already out there and to not really question the moral ideas that are out there currently. And it's basically an obstacle to morality. And then I can go on to describe to them about how Ayn Rand thinks of reason, purpose, and self-esteem as the three major values, and then go into the 7 virtues and how I apply those virtues to my life, and that they're based in reason, and that reason is based in the validity of the senses, and that I can actually grasp what's real, and I can actually figure out who I am, what my nature, what is my nature, and figure out a long-term plan to survive and to live my life happily. That's how I would go about it if I was, talking with a friend who is interested.
But you've done that.
I have.
And what's your success rate? This is no mean feat.
Yeah. And I do think it's super important to stress that at the end of the day, altruism is against morality, and not just in the trivial sense of, well, I've defined this other theory of morality based on self-interest that it disagrees with, but just in a common sense way where it's not interested in providing for you principles that you can use to guide your life in important decisions when you're making important decisions, because it's fundamentally about negation. It's not about achieving anything. It starts out by defining the self as evil. Yes. And so anything you can do to destroy that is all that it has anything to speak on. It doesn't have anything to say about, therefore, like what are good relationships? What is a good career? How should you try to? What happens when some people disagree with you, and you need to stand up against some kind of authority? And if anything, as I think you were hinting at this, what it does say in those kinds of cases is that you don't have the right to stand up for your own mind against others, because who are you to judge yourself as so much more important than they are? And one example of this that I think is really interesting, you know that there's this movement, the effective altruist movement.
Yes.
And in certain ways, you might think they are the utter embodiment of what's wrong with altruism, because they're the ones who are saying, well, figure out how you can make the most money just to give it away to charity, etc. And that part of it certainly seems like it's incredibly consistent. But what's even more interesting, and someday I plan to write on this, is the people typically on the left, but not only on the left, who criticize effective altruism from the perspective of altruism, and who basically say, who are these effective altruists to think that they can use all their rational calculating to figure out what's the best way to spend charitable money on what is it, buying malaria nets for people? And they don't have the right to decide what's good for other people. Yeah. They should really just do what we tell them to do, and usually it's an argument for why there needs to be a socialist revolution or something like that, and that the effective altruists are in effect endorsing bourgeois social values because they don't want to challenge the very institution that lets you make money and then give it away. So really, we should just take it all away without anybody doing any calculating.
Yeah.
So that's the real essence of altruism, which is that you don't have the right even to decide what's good for other people.
Right.
You just have to give up.
I wish more people could make that connection, that who are you to live for yourself is the same as it is saying, who are you to think for yourself? Right. Who are you to reach these conclusions on your own?
Ultimately, it's who are you to live?
Well, yeah.
Ultimately.
And
yeah,
I would hope that effective altruism has taken a hit. It seems to have, because there were a bunch of scandals, and not just the obvious, Sam Bankman-Fried, but even people in the EA movement who have behaved badly at conferences, and it's small wonder that people are objecting. Who are you? Because I see
the effective altruists as a very interesting kind of mixed bag. On the one hand, there's some pretty bad folks among them. I mean, the worst of them is Peter Singer, who's like the granddaddy of the whole movement, who's been encouraging all these idealistic young people to basically live their life completely for others.
Yeah.
But I think among many of his followers are in fact, young idealistic people, and they assume the only thing there is to be idealistic about is altruism. This is their big mistake. But when you're younger, you don't know everything, and if you're somebody who wants to live up to an ideal, well, this is the biggest ideal your culture offers you. And so some of these people are just, diving into it out of, I think, pure idealism. And, but then they're getting, ground up, not only by the leaders, but then by the critics who are saying, really, you idealists shouldn't even be putting any thought into this, which is in effect what the critique from the left of EA is.
That's extraordinary, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Again, who are you? Who are you to think that you can think this through?
Yeah. Am I okay? I'm going to go ahead and ask another question if you're okay, Robert.
Yeah.
Okay, so this goes back. I think it goes nicely into. So let me just say, this is my own anecdote. When I was a teenager, at one point in my teenage life, I called myself a communist at the time. And I thought, boy, wouldn't it be nice to have some kind of utopian society, a top-down sort of plan for the people that would eliminate all poverty and suffering. I know, it's embarrassing. And then
I have basically a similar story, so don't worry about it.
Okay. And then I graduated onto democratic socialism. And isn't it a little better not to force it on people, but to have people vote it in, right? And then after that, I discovered I started understanding Ayn Rand. Thankfully, I found her when I was 16. But I said a question I've got is, and I can kind of answer this in my own story, but I want you to tell me too. So why do altruists, primarily they crop up and they impose their morality in situations where the sick, the elderly and the vulnerable are at risk, like for instance in COVID, which you had great examples in your talk. And why don't they have any advice for the young, productive and healthy people other than, you must sacrifice for your life in order to mitigate the suffering of others, because, mitigating suffering is the noble idea, and sacrifice is noble in that way. And we're all in this together for COVID. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, we've touched on it a little bit already, and I think what it comes down to is that the core of the meaning of the doctrine is about giving up. It's not about achieving something. And so, like, if it were really just the same as helping other people, well, then you might have all kinds of advice to give about, well, who are the best people to help, and why will your help go further with certain people than with others, and that kind of thing. But as I've tried to argue, it's not really about that. Like, the others are just an excuse for your giving up, and they're only the latest one that's come along, after giving up for God, giving up for nature, giving up for unknown demons. So it's not really about the others, and it ultimately this is a psychological question, that, like, why does this doctrine have this content in the first place? Why does it start by damning the self and damning healthy selves, damning achievement and rationality and productiveness? And there's a lot to be said about that. I said a little bit about it in the talk. I've talked about it in other talks. There was one that I gave 3 years ago, I think, called Ayn Rand's Genealogy of Altruism.
Yes.
And I go through kind of the different psychological motivations that people have for being altruists, and going on the order from the more innocent reasons to the least innocent reasons. And the least innocent reasons are, in effect, altruism is and this is the one that I think the leaders, like the intellectual leaders who advocate for morality of self-sacrifice, what motivates them. And it's ultimately a rationalization for destruction, that they resent other people who have achieved something, other people who are rational, other people who stand up for themselves, who believe what they want, what they have good reason to believe in, and who are happy, and they resent them because, for whatever reason, they themselves haven't made good choices with their own life.
Yeah.
The fact that somebody else has made better choices stands as a rebuke to them. And so what they want to do is they want to find a way to eliminate this reminder. They want to find a way to not be reminded that other people have made better choices. And so how do you do that? Well, you try to convince other people to make the same bad choice that you've made, in effect. You try to convince them to take things on faith, and to take the morality of altruism on faith, which is the only way ultimately that you can accept it. And the more you have other people, believing this article of faith, especially one where they are the ones giving the sacrifices and you're the ones controlling them, the more you can fake to yourself that you are a good person, when in fact you're
This is the psychology of envy. And I've got to say, first of all, I just added some noise suppression to our audio. Folks, let me know in the chat if you can hear my voice just fine. I've got to say, I suffer from this naivete, this I call myself, I'm on Team Dagny. I don't really believe in evil, not real evil. And then you point that out, that there are some people who will use altruism as a way of dealing with their own envy. Well, this guy did really well, and he's a beautiful wife and a beautiful home, and he's very wealthy, and he hasn't sacrificed at all. What a terrible person. He's just rotten. But again, it's hard for me to remember that exists out there. And then I read your latest article, your latest essay, The Dark
yes.
Form of Control. And this will seem like it's switching topics, but it's
not.
Deeply connected. The dark form of control even anti-abortion moderates want. I thought, well, how could the moderates be worse? In a way, even worse than the more consistent advocates. This is an extraordinary article that you've just released. And Amy's putting it out there. Incidentally, if you try to buy this book on Amazon, the Why the Right to Abortion is Sacrosanct, it's now $100. It's a quirky thing that they ran out of paper copies. So when you're ready to share this, do get the Kindle, do get the electronic versions, and share that around.
That can't be right. I think maybe the one that's $100 is the first edition.
Oh, it's a used
and
copy.
If you look up the second edition, it's like probably $4.
Okay, we bought a bunch of them.
The second edition is the one you should get anyway because it's better and it has more stuff in it.
Good. Well, we bought a bunch of them. We did not pay $100 a piece for them, but we have shared quite a few of those.
It's nice. I didn't realize there was a second edition, so
yes.
I'm gonna rush to get that.
Up.
Yeah, we released it in January, and I'm looking at it right now on Amazon. It's $3 or
Excellent.
$6 for the.
Excellent. It's good to have a few of those on the shelf.
Even the expanded edition has the big new theoretical essay at the beginning about why there is a right to reproductive freedom, why the fetus, the embryo, has no rights, and I imagine the reason you're connecting this to our previous conversation by way of that article is one of the things I talk about in that article is how there's a series of inconsistencies in the contemporary, as you put it, moderate anti-abortion movement that I think bring out what the real motive behind a lot of opposition to abortion is.
Yeah, because immediately you think, well, the ones who are willing to make exceptions, even though we can, condemn their inconsistency, aren't they at least trying a softer approach?
But you might think that, and I'm not gonna, having some exceptions is certainly better than having no exceptions. If you're one of the women who's affected, but
what's going on there? Yeah.
I mean, here's the issue. So if you really thought that abortion is murder from conception, if you really thought that that if you destroy a 3-day-old blastocyst, fertilized embryo, which is what the laws in many states, including Texas, now demand, because they say that you can't have an abortion even from conception, unless it's to prevent an imminent threat to the life of the mother. If you really thought that was true, that the fertilized embryo had rights, that it was murder to kill it, you couldn't possibly think, that, it's okay to have IVF, and in fact, we should even have government funding for IVF because, well, that's for the sake of, reproduction, because everybody knows that it's inevitable that you are going to destroy some fertilized embryos in the course of doing IVF. And you also would think, if it really is, if that embryo really is a being with rights and killing it is murder, then you would not say, as all of the current anti-abortion laws say, that, but we're not going to target the mother. We're only going to punish the doctors. Because if it really is murder, wouldn't the person who's going to the doctor of her own will be the one who's engaging in a murder to hire scheme? I mean, they come up with a rationalization. She's a victim because she's vulnerable. And okay, so it's like we don't think women know how to make decisions for themselves on this one choice, and everything else we'll hold them accountable for. So it's evidence that, at least in many cases, I think they can't really believe that it's a being with rights, that this is murder, that's a rationalization. And if you think, well, what's really driving it, and what's consistent with their inconsistencies is that they're really just against the idea that it's there's something moral or healthy about having sexual joy.
Right.
Because, well, the other inconsistency was about rape. They give exceptions for women who are raped, And you wouldn't think if it was murder that why that should be the basis of an exception. I mean, you don't make it any less murder. You don't justify murder just because it's in opposition to rape. So the rape victim wasn't seeking any sexual pleasure. So that could explain why it is that they're okay with, giving her a pass in that case. And of course, someone who's engaging in IVF, who's using IVF, they're not having any sex at all. I mean, there's no sexual pleasure there at all. It's all in test tubes. But of course, it is for the sake of reproduction. And so if you just think about all the different inconsistencies, the one thing that connects all the dots is what they're really against is being able to use abortion in order to, as birth control of ultimate resort. And they're against the idea that you should be able to have sex for pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they hate women's self-determination. They hate that self-interest.
And on top of
that,
they
hate everybody's.
Yeah, as men, they hate themselves and they have self-loathing for their own ability to have that kind of physical joy. And,
I'm sure they hate men who are in a healthy relationship. Exactly.
And one added twist to this that I didn't go into in the article, but which says more about someday, is that I think part of what's got to explain this is it's not that they have a hatred of sex from birth or something like that. And it's not even necessarily just that they were indoctrinated with this view, through their religion, which, although that's a big part of it, I think very often it's also that they were indoctrinated with this view, and because they didn't want to challenge it, they lived up to this view.
Yes.
And when they look around at other people who don't challenge it, that's the resentment there. That's the trigger for resentment and envy. It's like, well, I was a good little boy, or I was a good little girl, and I didn't have sex before marriage, and I got pregnant and had all these kids, damn it, and you should have to do the same thing too.
Yeah.
And so interesting confession that maybe you didn't really want the kids.
Yeah.
But it's the same kind of resentment for other people's, in this case, independent thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That I wasn't able to do this independent thinking, and I want everybody to do the same thing, to make the same mistake that I made, and so therefore I'm going to force them to do it.
Yes.
Which is what laws against abortion do.
Yeah.
That is the most dysfunctional, twisted perspective on life that I don't know. I don't know if there's maybe there's some other worse thing out there, but
I think dark form of control was a good way to put it.
Dark form of
it's
control.
It's incredibly dark.
Oof.
And again, it reminds you that however naive you want to be, for people like me, there are just bad people out there. There are genuinely bad motives out there. People who have adopted this perspective, and to see somebody who hasn't and say, "Why aren't you an altruist?" or "Why aren't you his version of altruism, a traditionalist like me?" I knuckled under.
I think lots of people have this kind of motive to one degree or another. And the question is, what do you do with it? So like the people who are the crusaders against abortion rights are obviously the worst ones. I think what they're relying on, though, is there's a lot of people who have this kind of sense of shame or, some sense of resentment. And, maybe they think, yeah, gee, it seems so bad that we're doing these things to women, but I can't, why should I did all this stuff? Why shouldn't they have to?
Right.
Like I myself, when I was very young, when I was in high school, I was raised Catholic. And I remember experiencing something just like this. So like, I won't go into any names, but I was like the good little Catholic boy for quite some time, and I was also living by the rules, and I had some friends who did not agree with me about these things, and they did not think they should live by such rules, and they were getting boyfriends and girlfriends and sexually active at, late in high school, which is a very normal thing, and I was resentful of them, and I started like gossiping about them and saying nasty things about them, and it got back to my friends that I was doing this, and at a certain point, I had to make a decision. Like, do I care more about having friendships with these people,
Yeah.
or do I care more about this dogma that I've been taught that I'm, judging people in a gossipy way about? And that was actually one of the main catalysts for me rethinking everything, rethinking religion, rethinking morality, rethinking philosophy. Because I actually value my friendships more than the stupid set of rules that somebody gave me. And so maybe I should rethink the stupid rules rather than the friendship.
Darn straight.
Yeah. Well, Amy talked about how do you get through to people. One thing I always want to ask people is this, whatever it is, whatever the topic
working for you?
is this really what you want? Yeah. So it's great that you asked yourself, is this really what I want? Is this how I want to be?
Yeah.
I'd be remiss. Well, first of all, let me know if there's any time that you need to wrap up, because we can go on for a little longer if you like.
You can go a little longer.
Okay, thank you. One of the best parts of your talks for me is something oh my gosh, I didn't even really think of it, and I thought, oh, how could I not have thought of this? Virtue signaling. When you were talking about, especially, what is it, Greta Thunberg, and the tweet she put out or something like that, and
there was a tweet that Students for Liberty put
out.
Oh,
that's right.
Criticizing Greta.
You shouldn't signal your virtue. What? Well, as you say, it's kind of like the word woke.
Yes.
Woke just means awakened to. You're aware.
Like enlightenment.
And I get it that there are issues
not
there,
that.
but yeah, virtue signaling.
The issue here is that the idea that there's something bad or wrong about virtue signaling has become common currency, mostly on the political right, as a way of criticizing the left. And I kind of get it because, there's a lot of left-wing activists who are who like to post about their positions and post about their activism, and part of the implication of the virtue signaling charge is, well, they're only signaling, they're not actually doing anything. But if you think a little bit about the nature of that criticism, well, there's the question of, well, why is that the criticism you're making? If the problem is they're not doing anything to live up to their own professed values, well, then that makes them a hypocrite, or it makes them a poser, or why are you saying they're a virtue signaler? Especially since that seems to imply that you agree with their idea of virtue, just not only signaling it. Why aren't you willing to challenge their idea of virtue? And it's especially weird with Greta, because Greta's, like, if anybody, she's the one who's living up to her altruistic ideals more than anybody else. Yeah. And so why not instead say, no, what Greta wants us to do is actually not virtuous at all. It's actually rather vicious. She wants to tear down our whole standard of living. Mm-hmm. And so my point was, first, that using that catchphrase, virtue signaling, I think reveals kind of implicit unwillingness to challenge the conception of virtue that is so common in our culture, which is, of course, altruism. But the other thing is just like, virtue signaling is actually good if you have a rational conception of virtue, and to treat it as a pejorative like this term does is just a really bad move. Like I make the point, if you look at Galt's speech in Atlas Shrugged, Jean Galt is constantly talking about how he's the one who made the choice that many in his audience didn't, that he's the one who's willing to stand up for his life and his rights and his mind, and he is announcing his virtue for 90 minutes in that speech.
Yes.
He's broadcasting it to the world. I don't know what bigger signal there could be. And so that's, virtue signaling is a good thing if you really are virtuous. And if you think further about it, like this is the idea, this is basically the idea of, this is what self-esteem is. Self-esteem is the idea of recognizing the virtue that you have if you've really earned it. It's recognizing that you're a good person. Usually you only need to do it for yourself, but it is often important to share it with others, that you don't agree with their position, when it's an attack on your values. And what is that other than saying, no, I think I have a virtuous position and you don't?
Yes. That was such a great example.
Yeah, there's a bit of a cocky expression we use. It's not bragging if you can actually back it up, if it's actually true. And yeah, that can be done graciously or not, but it's not. It's not just signaling, it's actually virtue. And there's nothing wrong with the signal, with putting it out there. In fact, this, speaking of Atlas Shrugged, the sight of an achievement is the greatest gift you can give to another person. Yes. So you're exactly right in your approach to virtue signaling there. And again, I had kind of the same reaction to the word woke when people started using that as an insult. And what the left does with woke, the things that they think they need to be made aware of. I've done a whole episode, for example, against Ibram X. Kendi, who I guess is getting into trouble now. So people are going to accuse him of virtue signaling. Apparently, he's just not the upstanding. As you say, I don't care as much about that as what he's actually saying. And
the point I made about the use of the term woke in the talk was that it's a little different from virtue signaling. It's rather that by calling the movement that they want to criticize, and rightly criticize, woke, they are evading the necessity of naming what view that movement actually stands for and criticizing that view. And the way I put it is, the so-called woke movement is essentially an egalitarian movement. It's the idea everybody needs to be equal. They need to be, and what that usually means is people need to be dragged down to the same level of mediocrity. But nobody wants to say, "Oh, I'm against egalitarianism. I'm against equality of outcomes."
Right.
Because that would mean, again, standing up against altruism.
Right.
Yes, in agreement.
So you've got compliments coming in on the chat. I should mention at least a couple of them because the chat is very busy tonight, and we usually spend more time with it, but you've got a lot to say. We do have a lot to say too. But for example, Benjamin in the chat wants to say, I just wanted to say that Ben Baer is one of the greatest of all times, in my opinion. His talk at last year's OCON really left an impression on me since I was there, and the one he gave on the 4th was even better.
Real cool.
We did our own informal ranking, and we concluded that your talk was the best talk of the week.
It's an objective fact.
I'd be a hypocrite if I tried to have false humility.
Good. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Although I've got to say, Nicholas Krusek gave you a run for your money. If you haven't seen the recording of his talk on Nietzsche, it was really something.
It's really amazing.
We're hoping that one comes out on YouTube soon. But
what I will say, without being falsely modest, is that there were a lot of great talks at OCON, and I hope people take a look at them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, there was real competition for you there. So,
yes.
As Benjamin says, for you to be the GOAT at the conference was really something. GOAT, I hate that expression. It sounds like an insult. The greatest of all time really was saying something. So, thank you for that.
It's Simone Biles. She popularized that term, and that's fine with me. We do have
especially since she was the GOAT.
Yes, she is the GOAT.
Yes. We always come back to Ayn Rand and this. We were talking about this earlier. One of the challenges with explaining to people Ayn Rand's philosophic achievement is when we were younger. Philosophy was something you put together. You go out and you find the bits and pieces and the bits of wisdom you liked and the few things that you thought were true, and you assemble it all. And if somebody had come along at that time and said, no, wait, there was one person who really got all the important questions right. Like, oh, that doesn't say, nobody could have done that. So that's one of the challenges in being an objectivist, is to tell, no, actually somebody actually did that. And it makes sense if you understand that truth is one, that philosophic truths are integrated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the challenge there is real, but you can overcome it. And the reason that it's real is that I think rational people are, without knowing more, rightly skeptical of anybody who comes along, claims to be a guru.
Yeah.
Right.
And claims to know it all. And Ayn Rand didn't claim to know it all, but she claimed to solve a lot of problems. And that's because gurus have a really bad history.
Yes.
Like 99.99% of them were no good.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the way to overcome the challenge is to push back on the idea that philosophy, which is of course the field in which she's making her contributions, is or should be any different from other fields. So like people don't have trouble thinking that, oh, there's somebody in physics who really revolutionized the field.
Yes.
And like Newton or Einstein, like these are people who just as individuals answered all these questions in the field that nobody was able to do before. Or in biology, you have Darwin, or in any number of other fields. You can name the figures who are the leaders of the field who revolutionized it. And the reason people are skeptical of this in philosophy is they don't think philosophy is scientific. They think philosophy is just talking out of your hat, and it's like religion, and there's all these different religions, and people all have their own views, and who are you to judge me with your view versus mine? It's all just a matter of opinion. And so it ultimately comes down to they just don't think that philosophy, especially values, because morality is a central branch in philosophy, they don't think that's the sort of thing that's susceptible to scientific demonstration. And so ultimately it's about trying to convince people, well, what if this is another field just like these others where there actually are ways to scientifically demonstrate it? Well, then couldn't it be the case that somebody did the demonstration that others so far had failed to do? And like that's itself a tall order, because there's a long-standing skepticism about the possibility of deriving values from facts.
Yes.
But the more you start to, you don't have to actually do the demonstration to get people to think twice about the assumption, oh, you just can't demonstrate that, because you can do all kinds of things like, in effect, run the reaffirmation through denial test. So somebody says, who are you to go around judging? And you say, well, that's an interesting judgment you're making of me. So like you can't even avoid doing it yourself. So what's so special about yours? That's because I have good arguments for mine. Oh, really? Oh, what are the arguments? So like, so you can give arguments for value judgments. Well, what are your arguments? Here's some other ones. So
absolutely. Yeah. We do have, if you have another moment, we do have a quick question from the chat.
What's in the
on
chat?
YouTube. Stephen asks, he's asking about self-help articles and books, and that basically talk about taking time for self-care, otherwise protect your self-interest, possibly influenced by Ayn Rand. What do you think about that, or the state? I don't know if you know anything.
Kind of have to know what kind of books he's got in mind.
Yeah, but
I mean, I'm sure there's some cases where it's been. I mean, Nathaniel Branden is an example where obviously there was a whole. Leaving aside all the criticisms I have of Branden, that are many, he's obviously a self-help person who's influenced by Ayn Rand. But it's certainly not universal. And one thing I would say about especially the term self-care, at least as I often hear it, that is often very different from Ayn Rand, because it's often said in the context of you're out there all the time sacrificing yourself for other people. Isn't it time you take a break just for a while to do some self-care? In effect, so you can go on and keep sacrificing.
Yes.
And so it's sort of what it is a recognition. Of course, you can't just sacrifice yourself consistently. But it's very rare that I've heard people use that particular phrase in conjunction with the idea, you really just need to be caring for yourself all the time. It's more of like, here's this luxury brand or whatever to give yourself a break before you go off and fight the big altruistic fight.
Right.
It's much too popular of a phrase for it to be used in any other context, I think.
Yeah, we were actually talking with a friend of ours, Sean Albert, yesterday, about how they say, well, what you do is if you're in an airplane crash or something, you have to get the oxygen mask. You have to put on yourself first, and then you can put on somebody else. But it's still kind of in the context of within the service of others.
It's exactly
that makes a lot of sense for the airlines. But I would always have students when I used to teach for universities use that example of why they thought some level of self-interest was okay, And what I would always point out to them was, so are you saying you want to, in effect, put the mask on only so that you can help others put theirs on? Is it just that it's a means to that end? Because if that's your view, then your view is still the same old usual altruistic view.
Right.
Yes.
And then you join the effective altruism movement, and you only become wealthy so that you can give as much as possible away. Give till it hurts, but not too much, so you can keep working.
Yeah, we do have one more quick question. Actually, an early question from Anne. Says, Ben, you did a book on abortion in 2022.
Well, we're holding that. Yes, Anne, there you go.
You described it as a marketing project. How would you assess how it did 3 years later in terms of marketing?
Not well enough, which is in part why we did the second edition, which just came out in January.
Very good.
And it's surprising though. It's like we at the Institute, we actually hired a professional PR firm to try to promote that book, and one that was, run by kind of some conventional standard lefty liberal types, thinking, well, they're the ones who are going to be able to find us places that would like this message, and we paid them a decent amount of money for it, and they were barely able to place me anywhere. Like they got me a couple of little tiny small time media interviews, and placed it in some small articles in small papers, but not much. And I've subsequently had the same experience of trying to place further art, like the piece that you mentioned before, Robert, the one about the dark motive of the anti-abortion moderates. I sent that to major liberal newspapers to try to get it published, and none of them were interested. And it's an interesting question. Why? I don't really know why. I have a lot of hypotheses. It might just be that that Ayn Rand's name on the Institute, kind of her reputation precedes her on the left, and they don't care what we have to say about abortion because it's still Ayn Rand and she's still the enemy. It could be that. It could be that we're, in a way, just too radical for them, and they're afraid that if they platform people who are, in effect, in this case, saying a lot of conservatives who oppose abortion rights actually have a kind of vicious motive, that's going to make them look bad to their audience, because we're just arguing for the reasonable accommodations for abortion rights. I don't know. So it could be that they think we're too radical. Could be that I'm a white guy who's the one who's trying to
could be a
put
part
the
of
message
it
out there, and this is a very gendered issue, and they only like to platform women who want to speak on it. I don't really know what the real reasons. We're still going to keep trying. I'm still going to keep looking for opportunities, and I have more ideas about how it can be marketed more. And if other people have them, please send them to me.
Yes. And, and they're only $6. So get on Amazon, buy yourself, a case, and send them out to organizations that you know of. Who... And
all the chapters, all the articles in that book are published online for free on New Ideal too. So if there's a particular chapter you really like, you can just send that link to somebody.
Yeah, it's very easy to share.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I find I've conversed with people out in outside organizations who are not entirely sure about Ayn Rand or are confused, as often is the case. And I try going back to my statement / not quite a question at OCON after your talk, Ben. When I went up and I talked about using the virtues as descriptors for what you see in other people. If you see somebody acting virtuous, or somebody having a really good standard for something, or doing really excellent work, and you can use those to describe what you see, and give people the moral ammunition and the moral vocabulary that's so desperately needed out there. And just compliment their work and their behavior, what they say, and then try to use that those compliments as possibly a motivation for them to say, oh, maybe this Ayn Rand person isn't so bad after all. I should read her. But I don't know. That's the only thing I have. Yeah.
It's very challenging, and we're always thinking about this at the Institute.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I know you are. I know you guys work really, really hard. Of course, if you don't support the Ayn Rand Institute, please do. They're very easy to support. They want your money. They would. They want your
more
help.
than that, they'll put it to good use.
They'll put it to good use. They will. And yeah. And so, Ben, I really appreciate having you on tonight. And
and
thanks for sticking with us through our technical difficulties at first.
Yeah, and again, we'll continue to encourage people to listen to that OCON lecture.
Yes.
But also, I was really struck by this newest article, The Dark Form of Control, because again, you think, well, the moderates, they're kind of squished, they're not as bad, but just when you realize what that says about their motivation and what that tells you about what the fight looks like when that's at least part of what we're up against, it was very insightful, and I appreciate that. Do you have anything on the horizon, anything that you're working on now that we can look forward to? What's next?
Well, I can tell you this, I think that, so for a while now, for a couple of years, I've been writing a series of essays about, in effect, the religious basis of altruism. Not just historically, but ways you see it expressed in contemporary culture, all kinds of different movements on the secular left, which are empowered by altruism, still have very religious character and all kinds of mystical premises and assumptions. And I've been writing these in part because I think there's an audience out there of people who are secular, skeptical of religion, atheist, agnostic types, who are at least pretty good about recognizing what's bad about religion in many of its most overt and worst manifestations, but who maybe don't realize that whether because of the political ideas they sign up for or just causes they support, that they're still, insofar as they rely on the altruistic morality, are still relying on a major product of religion and don't realize it. And I'm trying to reach them and say, hey, if you really think of yourself as scientifically oriented, rational, skeptical religion, you should also apply the same skepticism to your morality. And so I'm putting together a book of these essays. It'll probably be out in the next 6 months or something like that.
Nice.
The tentative title is Breaking Free from Faith-Based Morality or something like that. That will probably still change.
That's good.
But it's going to have a lot of the essays I've already published, plus a new one that I'm currently putting the finishing touches on, where I, after having criticized these different religious forms of altruism, lay out the positive alternative and in particular Ayn Rand's theory. So that'll be coming out soon.
Well, that is something to look forward to. It's because the current administration seems so disconnected from religion, even though it's not. Sometimes it feels, oh, well, religion's on the wane right now. We've got all this other stuff going on, but it's really not. You think these things come and go, but they don't actually go. And so I'm glad that you are working on, continuing to work on religion, because it's still so much a massive piece of what is motivating human action out there. So thank you for that, and we will keep an eye out for that collection.
Yes. And if we don't talk to you before, we'll definitely see you next year. And the last week we're doing at OCON in New Orleans.
OCON at New Orleans is going to be, that's going to be excellent.
It's going to be immensely valuable.
Only thing that could be better is we'll get you to come to Detroit someday.
Yeah.
And then we can weed out the week, because Detroit. Just kidding. Ben, thank you for this conversation. This was great. We will continue to get folks to watch that speech if they haven't already, and keep an eye on what you're doing for us at the Ayn Rand Institute. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert and Amy.
Thank you, Ben.
Bye.